There we go. All right, so today, again, we're going to talk about MassFx. MassFx is the physics engine used by 3ds Max. With it, we can create and simulate dynamic objects that react to each other, as well as forces such as gravity. MassFx can also simulate cloth using what is called mCloth. Hopefully you will gain a basic understanding of MassFx. That's really all, this whole purpose is for. Again, the requirements and then some resources for you. Now these two videos here I made down at the bottom. They are going to go into depth a little more than I'm going to go in class. I think you'll find them useful. Okay, so let's go ahead and you go away. And let's bring up Max. Let's go ahead and do a little housekeeping as always. So I'm going to set my project folder. Now we need to bring up a couple of toolbars that are not normally loaded. And the way you can get to toolbars that are not normally loaded is come up here to your main toolbar and right click somewhere, preferably not on a button. I'm going to have to slide this down, so hopefully I can get in there. Ah, perfect. Okay. This is the one I'm looking for. And you will see I have a MassFx toolbar. So somewhere empty in your toolbar. For most of you, you can just do it from the end. It's pretty easy. Unfortunately, my resolution is slightly different. Therefore, I have to slide around on my toolbar. But MassFx toolbar. And it's going to open up this bar right here. Now, the very first icon looks like the world and a window in front of it. We're going to go ahead and open that one as well. So we actually have two toolbars that we're going to be focusing on today. The MassFx tools and then this nameless one here that doesn't actually have a name, but it's the MassFx toolbar. Just having those open uses up memory. So if you're not working with MassFx, you need to make sure you close those. This will be where we create most of the MassFx, and then this is where we can alter some of the settings. Now there's a lot of settings here, a lot of different things. I'm going to go over some of them as we work through it. First things first though, let's make sure that we have use ground collisions selected, as well as global gravity, and gravity is set to be pointing downwards. Below that, you'll see where it says rigid bodies. These numbers vary, but we have substeps and solver iterations. Substeps means how often does Max check for a collision. So if that number is too low, your objects are going to sit there and bounce like popcorn. I had a student describe it as popcorn physics one time. I have seen all kinds of radical numbers. I've seen this substeps up to 30 or 40. That runs really, really slow. 3 on your substeps tends to work pretty good, at least for me. Your mileage may vary. You may need to change that. But just know that where it says substeps under rigid bodies, it is looking for, are my two rigid bodies intersecting with each other? Below that, we have the solver iterations. Again, I've seen crazy numbers here. 30 tends to work pretty good for me. Below that, we've got a couple of options here. Use high velocity collisions. Only use that if you need it. Okay, it's a little tick box. Use adaptive force is turned on by default. I don't think I've ever turned that off. And then generate shape per element. Everybody remembers what an element is within our editable poly objects. An element is all connected polygons. So if I have an editable poly that is made up of a cylinder, 2 cylinders, one of them is a hammer. Here, I'm just going to draw it. Just so that everybody knows what I'm talking about here. Okay, that's my hammer of doom. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and make the handle an editable poly. So convert to editable poly. And I'm going to use my attach feature under the editable poly to attach the top half. Now when I go into my sub objects, this is one element and this is one element. So if I say generate shape per element, Max is hopefully going to do a good job and generate the shapes. Now when we generate the shape, we're generating the part that's actually the physics part. So you might have a very high resolution object with a very low resolution hitbox on it. But this would generate two separate shells, two separate holes based on the different elements. Hammer of Doom is going away though. Okay.
I had a question about the substeps.
Okay.
What happens when the number is too high?
It runs very, very slowly. It just checks and checks and checks and checks, and so it eats up a lot of your processor.
Okay.
So too low, your stuff's going to sit there and vibrate, and we'll tinker with these once we get something kind of made, so that you can see the difference. Like I said, 3 tends to work pretty good for me, but I've seen crazy numbers of people on different tutorials going, yeah, we're going to set these to 9 or 90 or something, and it's like, okay, that just makes my machine drag.
And
so, go ahead.
For the solver iteration, when changing the number, when you decrease it, increase it?
I almost never change solver iterations. 30 works really good for me, and I don't remember the last time I ever changed it. Okay, so we'll come back to the rest of these here in a little bit. Let's go ahead and start, and we're going to make our first physics object. So now, size matters when you're working with physics. Do not make your objects very, very small. You're going to have trouble with them going where you want them to be. And also, things tend to run differently when they're really big. Case in point. A little shameless self-promotion as always. Yeah, please. Man, I could not be a YouTuber just for that.
That's like the first 30 seconds of every video.
I like it when they put it at the end. A couple of guys that I watch, they'll do it at the end. And it's like, okay, I don't mind that quite so bad. All right, let me see if I can find these. Man, these are old. Okay, so these are two different, very different things. And just so you know, Blender could do this too, probably just as well. So this is one I made in Blender, and I was paying attention, and I got my sizes about right. These cubes are about 2 or 3 inches each, and you can kind of tell that runs pretty smoothly, right? Things move fairly quickly. With this one now, I made the mistake. Where'd you go? Of thinking these blocks were about 3 inches. It turns out these blocks are closer to 3 feet long. I was not paying attention. Watch how this one plays out. One of the reasons they're moving so slowly is because they're 3 feet long. Okay, so how big you make something matters. Now with that being said, you can still work in generic units. You can still think in inches. You don't have to necessarily switch over to centimeters or anything like that. So I'm going to stick with my generic units. I'm pretty sure that's where I'm at. Let's double check before I... Yep, generic. So these will work just fine. Now I'm going to just create a box. We use keyboard entry for this. And we'll just go 10 by 10 by 10. And then we'll say create. Now when we make a physics object, we have 3 different flavors of physics objects that we make. Number 1 is called a static rigid body. A static rigid body never moves. So that could be a wall in your scene that doesn't move, or maybe the floor that's never going to move. And then you have what are called dynamic rigid bodies. A dynamic rigid body responds to all of the forces that you've tied to it in the simulation. So it will fall under gravity. If it hits another rigid body of any type, it will bounce off of that rigid body or push that rigid body, unless it happens to be a static, and then the static's going to stay put and the dynamic rigid body is going to bounce off it. And then the third one is called kinematic. A kinematic rigid body allows us to keyframe parts of it, and then at a certain point during our animation we can say, okay, you are now under the control of the physics engine. So in my example, when I shoot the balls out of the cannons, the first half of that animation, or the first 3/4 of that animation, is keyframed. Once they hit the towers, they switch over to being from kinematic to being dynamic, and they begin to react to the environment. I can see these three different types by going to my MassFx toolbar and clicking and holding on the second icon. Second icon's got that little check mark or the little arrow down at the bottom. So if I click and hold, we will see it says set selected as dynamic, set selected as kinematic, or set selected as static. Static never moves. Dynamic responds to the environment. Kinematic allows us to keyframe and then respond to the environment. We're going to start off with something nice and simple. And I'm going to set this to be just a dynamic rigid body. Now I have raised it up off the ground level a little bit. Before we actually run the simulation, let's look at what creating the dynamic body did for us. This is simply a modifier that is applied to our box. Below that we have some basic options, and we'll take a look at all of these, but you can change the type. We've already set it to dynamic. That's what we want. This little button here says start in sleep mode. If you build a big old tower and you want to knock it down, but every time you do it just falls down on its own, or maybe it sits there and vibrates and goes like this. Well, you can tick this start in sleep mode button, and that will make your physics object not respond until it comes in contact with another physics object. So if your tower constantly falls down, you can start in sleep mode, and therefore you don't have to worry about it exploding on its own. Okay, now the physical material, we have rigid body properties and we have physical material. This is where I can set some presets. So like if I want my box to be made out of cardboard, there's a preset for that. It gives me a density of 1.5, a mass. Mass is calculated by how big the box is times the density. Static friction, dynamic friction, and bounciness. If you want something to roll along something else, like a ball, I would recommend basically getting rid of most of the friction, because otherwise the ball is not going to roll the way you want it to. Now again, play with these settings, guys. Jump in there and see what happens if you get rid of the friction completely. See what happens if you crank the friction up to 1, which would be 100%. But this one is really important. What is your object made out of? Is it cardboard? Is it concrete? Is it limestone? You can set it for none, and then you can put in your own numbers here. So I have a density of 10. Now I have a mass of 164. All right, does that make sense? Okay. We keep going down, physical shapes. When I first apply any type of rigid body, Max is going to look at the shape of the object and do its best to make that shape for me. If I come down here a little farther, you'll see where it says display shaded holes. When I tick that button, the polygons disappear from my cube, and I get this kind of a blue replacement, I guess. I'm not sure what you would call that. But that is the physics hole that is going to register whether or not it is touching something. A lot of times box works great when you put a box on there. There is one slight problem with what I want you to do, which is you're going to build a tower of some sort and then hopefully knock it down. I mean, that's what I would recommend you do. It's a good learning lesson for this. Unfortunately, box is slightly bigger than your box. And so you'll get this thing where they bounce. And again, we'll look at all this as we go. But we can change that. And I'm going to say this wrong. I know I am. We want to set it to convex. Let me make sure that's right. Hey, I actually got it right. We're going to change it to convex rather than box. But again, we'll come back to that here in a little bit. All right. We can apply certain forces. So wind, vortex, things like that. Remember last week we learned when we look at our forces, it tells us what it affects. So it'll say dynamic objects or particles or both. So if you put in something and it doesn't affect your simulation, chances are it just doesn't affect those types of physics objects. And we're not going to talk about that. Okay. So let's go ahead and see what happens when we test our simulation. Now to test my simulation is pretty simple. I've got these play buttons up here. I've got play simulation. Why won't you pop up? Because reset. Anyway, this one's play. Exciting. Go ahead and hit play. Okay, if it didn't move, what happened was you can start simulation without animation or start with. Maybe yes, it's in sleep mode. Thank you. Good call. Good call. It's in sleep mode. Okay, so does everybody's cube drop? If it doesn't, check and make sure and see if you put it into sleep mode. Because it's doing exactly what you told it to do if it doesn't move. Which is great. Thank you for that. All right. Let's reset our simulation. And we're going to add a few more objects to it. I'm just going to make boxes again. I'm going to create 10 by 10 by 10. So this one's going to be a little less exciting, but we're going to go ahead and make this a static rigid body. So that way when my dynamic rigid body falls, it will do something a little more exciting than hit the ground. It will hit the static one and then fall over. So with this one selected, I'm going to say set as static rigid body. Now notice how the icons change on each one of these. A dynamic rigid body looks like a ball in motion, falling downwards. A kinematic rigid body looks like a ball in motion going left to right. Static rigid body appears to be a ball sitting on a plane. Sooner you learn those, the better off you are. So now if I run my simulation again, but a little more exciting that time. After we're done, let's reset and let's go ahead and give ourselves a little more time on our timeline. So let's go ahead and set that to about 300. I've noticed most of the simulations that I've created in the past, regardless of how tall the tower is, tend to run pretty well in about 300 to 400 frames. Okay. Well, the very last one we're going to do as far as just showing the basics of them. Is let's make one more cube. I'm going to raise this one up in the air. Maybe we'll just do, yeah, we'll put it on that side. This one is going to be a kinematic rigid body, because I want to demonstrate how those work. I'm going to go ahead and change the color. So I have set it up to be a kinematic rigid body. Remember, kinematic allows us to add a little animation and then later on during the simulation say, okay, you are now under the simulation. So in this case, with my kinematic rigid body selected, under my rigid body option properties, it says rigid body type kinematic, and then there's a little tick box that says until frame. So I'm going to go ahead and tick that, and we're going to say until frame 15. Now I'm not going to add any animation at this point. What's going to happen is it's going to sit here floating in the air until frame 15, and then it will fall. So let's go ahead and run that simulation. Does that make sense? Okay. Now we're going to do more with these, but hopefully everybody understands those three basic types. I'm going to go ahead and 86 all these. Going to go to, and that's the long and the short of it right there, guys. That's easy. Now, in the videos that I have made in the past, I go through the process of how to create a ball and chain. I would highly recommend you watch that because it's a cool thing to be able to do. You gotta love technology. You might try a different machine. Might hop on the far side or something.
Yeah. That's hilarious.
Yeah, that's life, man. If that's the worst thing happens to you today, you're having a great day.
Yeah. That's max. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. All right. I'm going to give Zach a second. Get caught back up. Any questions about what we've done so far?
Do you have any idea how to change the language on it?
What was it? Open the right one.
No matter what I do, they all open up in different languages.
Okay. Try the computer. That would be my suggestion. Let's close
Sorry, what?
Just remember where everything's at.
So I'm here for. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. I'll show you that in just a few minutes. Yes, ma'am. I'm definitely going to cover that. I didn't really go into it. No. Oh, come up here right quick. Make sure that MassFx toolbar is open. There are two separate toolbars.
Gotcha.
So, yep, there you go.
And we're not using the summer one?
We're going to use both of them. Leave them both open. Yep, leave them both open. Is that better, Austin?
Yeah.
English? Alright. I'm going to go ahead and save this file while I'm waiting. Okay, you ready?
Yes.
All right, let's do this, guys. We got a lot to cover yet.
Yep.
Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you a quick and easy way that you can build a tower that you can then knock down. I guess how fun is that, right? I have a ton of videos on my channel that are dedicated to doing just that. Setting things up and knocking them down. They're loads of fun. All right. So we're going to start off with the box again. I'm going to make the simplest little tower that I can. But we're going to go 10 by 10 by 10 as our first box. And then I am going to move it on the y-axis. I'm going to move it out to 20 units out. Okay, so I'm at 0 on the other two, on the X and the Z, but I moved it 20 on the Y. Now the reason I did that is because I want to demonstrate what is called the working pivot. This I've showed some of you, most of you have probably not seen this. The working pivot by default is a pivot point that sits at 0, 0, 0. It's kind of handy. The neat thing is, if I want to, I can align the working pivot with any object in my scene and use it there. For our purposes, we're going to leave it at 0, 0, 0. So I'm going to go over to my third panel in my command panel, called the hierarchy panel, and I'm going to say use working pivot. So notice when I turn that on, my pivot jumps from the object that it was on over to the center, over to 0, 0, 0. So this is useful because I want to make a tower. So I moved that one 20 units out. I'm going to hold shift and I'm going to rotate 90 degrees. Now this is very, very, very important. Make sure that you are making instances and not copies. We're going to create a couple hundred of these things. And when we do, we want to put one single MassFx on one of them and have it apply to all of them. That way, if I have to make changes to my MassFx, I only make it in one spot and it affects all 250 of my blocks. So make sure that you select instances. And I'm going to go ahead and make 3 because that's going to give me all the way around. Sorry about that. Now I'm going to do that one more time, but I'm going to only rotate them 45 degrees. Again, instances. Okay. Now we're going to look at one of my favorite and probably one of the more underrated tools. Going to go ahead and select all of my cubes. Going to go up to my tools at the top. It says tools. Click and drop down. And I'm going to select the array tool. Give everybody a second to get there. I'm going to leave that floating. Okay. Now the array tool is a quick and easy way for me to make lots and lots of copies of something. So the first thing I want to do is, number one, I'm going to check and make sure that I'm creating an instance. I'm going to go to my preview and I'm going to turn that on. And then what do I want to do? Well, I want to raise these up, right? I want my copies to be above because I'm making a tower. So that's my z-axis. And they're 10 square, the cubes are 10 units each. So by moving them up 10, you will see I now have a really tall tower. And I'm going to go ahead and turn on my edged faces so we can see what I'm looking at there. Now this is pretty good at this point. This is useful. But what would happen if I could rotate them. Now I have a really cool looking tower. When you went into the array, you only had one of your cubes selected. So cancel out of the array, and then make sure you have everything selected, and then bring the array back up. Hit preview, and then do 10 on this.
Saying we're just like tear down a leaning tower.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
On the 10 or on the Z. Then you got preview.
Yeah, start to stick that. It was called.
You got then what you want to do
But
is
for
rotate them
some reason, I
on the
was
Z
thinking
axis.
of a UV unchecked
About
player.
17 degrees.
As long as you do that, you can.
Now, the nice thing about having the array tool open is you can still look, you can still pan around. You guys notice, like when you have the align tool open, you can't do anything except align crap. Okay, with the array tool, you can still get in there and rotate around. So go ahead and select all of those. Go to tools. Do you have two keys there?
It has like a measure.
Okay, we want to go ahead and get rid of those first.
Gotcha.
Okay. Yeah. These are brand new cubes. We have not actually done that step yet.
Oh, okay.
Go to our tools. Right. Go up. Take preview. Your cube 3.
I
Your
could
cube
hear
need to
his
move up
face.
10 on the Z.
I watched the video.
And then rotate them on to about 17 degrees on the Z axis.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay. Everybody got this? Okay, yeah, that would be cool, but I think you would end up with trouble. All right, Tyler, but you just kind of, okay, good man. Okay,
Quick question?
Yeah.
If I were to, take, never mind, I can just use a dummy instead.
I'm gonna get to that. I think I know where you're going with your question, and I'm gonna get to that. It's a good question. Okay, so once I've done this now, you can change the number. So right now it's making 10 copies, but where it says 1D count, if I say 20, now I'm gonna have 20 copies. In the little short video that I posted yesterday, I do not one-dimensional arrays, but I think I do like two-dimensional arrays. So I have them not only go up, but go on the x-axis as well, and make copies of themselves. You can make three-dimensional arrays. We could spend a lot of time on arrays, but if you can accomplish this, then you understand the basics of how the array tool works, and that's what you need at this point in your education. So I'm going to hit OK. Now, luckily, I made all of these instances. So I can come in here and I can select one of these and make it a dynamic rigid body. Notice I didn't do that before I began working. It really slows things down, these dynamic rigid bodies. The biggest simulation I've ever ran was a Galton board, and I believe it is like 1,000 balls that fall down this thing and hit these pins. I could smell my computer melting. Okay, wasn't quite smoke coming out of the back of it, but it was pretty close.
And so again, once you only click one of them, since it's an instance, all of them.
It applies to all of them, so I can check any of these, and they will all have that same MassFx. Now, this is an instanced MassFx, so any changes I make to one of these affects all of them, which is great. So let's kind of see what happens to our simulation. So let's just play our simulation. Wow, that actually worked pretty good. I'm happy.
They minor steel, and yet they still bounce on a wave.
Yep, and that is because of the cube.
Oh, that's right.
Okay, now watch this, guys, real quick. I want to make sure. Okay, I had changed it over to convex. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to box, which is the default. Make sure that your shape type is set to box. Keep my fingers crossed, because it's hard to break things on command. Ah, there we go. Did everybody see that? Here, let me show you again. Boing. Okay, and that's because of the simulation, things tend to fall into one another just a tiny little bit. And that box is crossing over, the shell is crossing over into the others. If it just falls down automatically, there could be any number of things. Okay, yeah, I can see what's happening is if you look real close like this, it's just barely touching. So that's that. But it's pretty standard. Don't feel bad. Brienne's hair just like exploded. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay.
The sphere and capsule make it explode.
But please stay with me here, guys, because I'm going to answer all the questions that you're going to have as I'm talking up here. So work with me, all right? Stay with me. I'm going to give you at least an hour to play. All right. But this is the effect that I don't want to have. That bounce. Now, different ways I could fix this. If I want to be super lazy, I can come over here and say, start in sleep mode. Now, nothing is going to happen until another rigid body smacks into these. Okay, the other way to fix this, there's two more. One of which would be to grab all of my rigid bodies. Once I test my simulation, and it's going to bounce, now I can pause it. And if I go down to, where are you at? Gotta find it, sorry guys. Oh, there it is. All right. So I have tested my simulation. I got the little bounce out of the way. The tower stands fine once it bounces. If I go to the second option in my MassFx tools, looks like the hammer and the wrench, there is an option for capture transforms. When we do our flag here in a little bit, we're going to capture the transforms because we don't want our flag to start out stiff. We want it to start off in a relaxed position. But I could capture these transforms. Now if I run my simulation again, I don't get that bounce. The other way to fix it, and I just need to have one of these selected, is to come over here and change the shape type from box to what is called concave. I lied. I always get those wrong. It's not concave, it's convex. No. I don't know why I have the hardest time remembering now.
They sound pretty similar.
They do, but why aren't you changing? Huh. Okay, 1 second. Swear to God, I did this in my office yesterday and it worked just fine. Huh.
I'll hit preview.
All right, we're gonna return to that here in just a minute. Why are you up here? Okay, I got it. Sorry. This is so weird. Okay. This goes underneath here. Okay, that's why I couldn't find it. I know where it's supposed to be. Okay, so under the physical shapes, when I select concave, now this is mostly used if you have an object that has a hole in it of some sort. After I'm done lecturing, I probably will go ahead and put together the chain. I just don't want to try to keep everybody's attention while I do that. It's kind of difficult. I do have a video of me doing it. But when I select concave, in the rollout that is normally underneath my physical shape, my physical mesh parameters, I get this option for generate. And this is going to make a new shape based on the polygons that I have selected. The more complex the shape that you use, the longer your simulation takes to simulate. So let's go ahead and test this again, keep my fingers crossed. Okay, not bad, pretty happy with that. I'm going to go ahead and let it settle, pause it, and then say capture transforms. Now by capturing my transforms, if I run this again, it's just going to sit there and wait for something to come and smash into it. Now this takes some getting used to. I've noticed a few of you guys, they either keep falling down or they keep exploding. That's my first 3 weeks playing with MassFx. How come my stuff kept blowing up? How come my stuff falls through itself? But I didn't have me either. So you guys have the benefit of having me. Okay. So let's make something that smashes into our tower at this point. So I'm just going to make a ball. Not an overly big ball. Now, I forgot to go back to my hierarchy panel and switch over from my working pivot. So I'm going to go ahead and exit out of that so that my pivot goes back to my ball. For this dynamic, or for this rigid body, it is going to be a kinematic rigid body. And of course the purpose for that is so that I can animate it moving towards my tower. Then once it hits the tower, I will turn over control of the ball to the simulation. So let's watch how I do this real quick. Super easy. Don't go getting anywhere. Okay. So I've already said you're a kinematic rigid body. I'm going to come down here to auto key, and we're just going to do the first 20 frames or so. Not what I wanted, but I'll take it. Okay. So I've added the animation of the ball. Now with the ball still selected, I'm going to go over to my properties inspector. I'm going to find my rigid body properties. I'm going to find where it says kinematic, rigid body type, and I'm going to tick the until frame. And in this case, I want the ball to carry a little bit of that forward momentum with it once it leaves the animation. So I'm not going to wait till I get to frame 20. I'm going to go ahead and give control of the ball to the simulation at about frame 17. Some experimentation will kind of show what happens if you wait till frame 20, because then the ball's just going to drop because it does not have that forward momentum to it.
So basically, you can mix keyframes with physics to
With
give
kinematic objects only, yes, 100%. That's their purpose. Is so that you can animate a little bit in the beginning, and then you can turn it over to the simulation. It is pretty cool. I think it's neat. Okay, so let's go ahead and reset the simulation. Now, coming down here and hitting these buttons, you'll notice that doesn't run your simulation. Only the buttons up here do. Boom. Okay, let's run that again. Now, just for fun, I'm going to take my box and I'm going to change the type to concrete, and I'm going to take my ball and I'm going to make it out of cardboard. Man, that's a tough box. Tell you what we're going to do. We are going to change things up a little bit, and I'm going to go ahead and make it take 30 frames. And that's more like what I wanted. Yes?
So my tower's falling before the ball hits it?
When it gets to it, we can look at that. Give me a little bit. Like I said, more than likely you've just got one or two cubes that aren't touching the way they're supposed to be, and that's what's causing it.
My tower's not falling at all.
Yeah? Run your simulation for me. Okay.
You got I mean,
Hang on. Let me see what's going on. I don't know what you've done. Okay. Go to convex. If you do concave, they're basically hollow. Okay, so you come here and then you're going to say, absolutely. Okay, so concave, come up and hit the generate. Now.
so use concave.
Concave and tell it to generate the holes.
Alright.
Okay.
What about convex?
Convex basically means they're hollow.
Okay.
I haven't quite figured out what that one's for yet, so. All right. So I like to tinker, and this is why I spend way too much time doing this stuff sometimes. Now we're going to make the boxes out of cardboard and going to go ahead and make the ball out of steel. That's some good strong cardboard right there. Hey, I'm telling you. It's not that cheap Amazon crap. Okay. So there's lots of little things that might go wrong with your simulation. The first 10 or so that you make should blow up or fall down accidentally or do weird things that you don't want them to do necessarily. Oh, that's so much fun. I love it. Okay. So now there is so much more to explore about this. We're not even done yet. I'm getting ahead of myself. Don't do that. Now, currently I can run my simulation and I can see it. It's like, oh yeah, it falls down. But when I reset it, of course, it all goes away. That's because I need to now do what is called baking my simulation. When I bake my simulation, it is going to create all of the keyframes necessary for the animation to play back. A couple of things I like to do though, because oftentimes when I make a simulation, it doesn't stay where I make it. I like to work at 0, 0, 0. But that's not always where things end up. I also like to make things in one file and import them into other files. So the easy way to do this, one easy way to do this, is to create some parent-child relationships before we actually bake our simulation. So I'm going to use my helpers. I'm going to create a dummy. And then I'm just going to go ahead and put it between the ball and my tower. I'm going to just select my ball and my tower, use my linkage tool, and I'm going to make that dummy that I created the parent of all of these objects. When we create animation, all the keys that are created are relative to the parent. So if it's just floating in the world, like I've got the animation on the ball originally, then they were relative to the world. Since I have made the ball a child of my dummy, that movement is now relative to the dummy. So later on when I'm done, if I move the dummy, the animation moves with it. Okay, so now to baking. When I am all done tweaking my animation and my simulation and I've got it just the way I want it, I'm going to come over here to my MassFx toolbar. I'm going to double check my settings, make sure I'm set for at least 330. Make sure high velocity collisions is turned off. It will slow things way down unless you absolutely need it. You got something moving super fast. I'm going to check my settings, jump over here to the simulation tools, and then I can either bake selected or I can bake all of them. Now for a small animation like this, you could bake all of it. Okay? If you have 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 towers, you might bake them at different times down the timeline. So you would say bake selected. But I'm going to say bake all. Depending on your simulation, this can take anywhere from 30 seconds to an hour or more. But notice what it's doing. It's writing all of those keyframes for me at the bottom. That's what baking does. So even if your tower's just fallen down, you can still bake that at this point. Okay? Now that it's all done baking, I can scrub my playhead and the animation will run. I no longer have to simulate it. It's already simulated. A couple of things that I do when I am all done with making one of these is I like to remove all my MassFx. Now, if I'm not sure I'm done yet, I'm not going to do that because I might need to unbake them. And if I unbake everything, then it's going to delete all of those frames that it has created, all those keyframes that it's made for me. But I'm happy with this, and we're going to leave this alone. So I'm going to grab one of my blocks in the tower, and I'm going to come over, and I'm going to 86 that MassFx rigid body. And I'm also going to get rid of the one on the ball. Now I only do this after I bake because all my keyframes are already written. And again, the reason being, just having the MassFx toolbar open slows your machine down. When you have 100 or 500 or 1,000 or 5,000 physics objects, your machine is going to crawl. So I figured out a while back, once they're baked, I can go ahead and get rid of those MassFx. Once I get rid of that, everything speeds up. Now the beautiful thing is, I can grab my dummy, which is the parent, and I can move this anywhere I want. If I double click, then I will grab not only the parent, but the child, or the children. Now I can shift drag and make a copy of it. In this case, I do want it to be a copy. I'm going to grab this guy. I'm going to shrink this down really, really small. And since everything is relative to the dummy, it still works just fine. So now I have another animation that I've created. I've got my room and I've got all my stuff in it. Now I can take this simulation that I've created and I can put it on the shelf in my room, in my animation. I can bring this into Max. Or I'm sorry, I can bring this into Unity and have it play. I know Unity has its own physics engine, and you could build something very similar to this in Unity pretty easily. Having it pre-done is going to save you processor later. So, okay. So this is just the beginning. There's so much you can do with this. So much simple stuff you can do with this. You can get really, really complex too. Anytime you see something explode in a movie, it's this. Okay? Took me a while to realize that they're not actually blowing up buildings. Right? So, wow. You'd think people in Miami would get upset about that, right? All them cars blowing up on the side of the road all the time. And then it occurred to me, well, no, that's a mix between probably Houdini, probably mostly Houdini now. But a couple of years ago, Max was on the forefront of that. Okay? And they still are to a certain degree. I'm not, you know.
Does Blender have similar stuff?
Absolutely, absolutely. They call theirs PhysX, I believe.
Okay.
Same difference. Same exact thing. Okay. So, for your homework assignment, I want you to play with this. I want you to build something cool. It can be a tower, it can be a castle, it can be whatever you want it to be. But you need to make it, and then you need to knock it down. Okay? Now, the other side of things, real quick, I'm going to show you cloth. Because I know I've been talking for an hour. In fact, we might take a break. Then we'll come back and I'll show you cloth. And then I'll cut you loose, and you can explore this and watch my videos. So let's take a few minute break here. So here we go. Part 2. All right, so the other side of the physics engine that we're going to look at today is going to be the cloth, or M-cloth as it's called. So let's do a little setup. And we're going to begin by creating a flagpole. So I'm going to start with a box. And we'll go 10 by 10 by 5 this time. And so that creates a little box for me there. I'm going to actually resize that because I don't quite like it. So let's say 20 by 20 by 5. Okay, that's better. I am going to go ahead and create a cylinder. Fairly tall. That looks nice and tall. So mine is 135 units tall, and it's going to have a radius of 2. So that's 135 inches by 2 inches. And I'm just going to go ahead and put that at 0. And then finally, to make the flagpole actually look like a flagpole, we're going to create a sphere. And again, using our align tool, we just align that up. And there we go. There we have our flagpole.
Range should be about like 2, right?
I would make it maybe a little bigger. Mine is set to 4, so maybe 3. Actually, I'd go with 4. Okay. So now I want this to all be one object. So again, convert to editable poly. Use my attach tool. And I'm just going to go ahead and attach all of those pieces so that when I move it, it's one object. Okay. We will turn that into a physics object here shortly. For now, because I want things to run relatively smoothly, I'm going to wait till the very end to add my MassFx. So let's go ahead and create our flag now. Now there's a number of different ways you can do this. You could start off with a plane and increase the geometry a whole lot. Maybe not that much. Let's say 50. And I'm going to tweak my numbers as far as size goes as well. Let's say 20 units by 45. And that's not quite right either, so let's say 20 by 40. That looks better. Okay, so that's one way I could make my flag. And again, the size is not super important, just, you know, something that looks kind of like a flag. The other way, and I would be remiss if I didn't show this to you, is called the garment maker. And so I am going to use the N-gon tool, which is a line tool. I'm not sure if that was obviously the best choice. I think it is, because now I can say 4. Oh, look at there. No, I don't like that. Never mind. I lied. I'm going to use my rectangle tool. That would be better. There we go. Okay. So instead of creating a plane, I'm going to create a rectangle. And now I'm going to apply what is called my garment maker modifier to it. I'm going to deselect that so we can kind of see it. Maybe I'll pick a different color. Let's go with basic gray. Okay, oh, that's much better. Okay, so we can kind of just look at these two objects, and right off the bat we can see the difference. The one that I made out of the plane is perfect little squares, or in this case more rectangular shape, but still they're perfect quads. The garment maker, however, uses triangles. That is going to make your garment fold a little more naturally. Whichever way you want to do this is completely up to you. It makes no difference to me. But the garment maker is kind of a cool thing, and since we're working with cloth, I thought you should probably know about it. So you just create a shape, and then you apply the garment maker to it. But I'm going to use my plane. I'm going to go ahead and rotate my plane and line it up with my flagpole. Okay. So hopefully we have something similar to this. Now, if your flag is really large, it might be really super bendy and stretchy. Not really sure how to counteract that. We'll kind of look at it, but sometimes it doesn't really work. So again, you know, try not to make things too big or too small. And don't scale. Okay, yeah, change your parameters. That's the beauty of having those parameters, guys, is we can just change it there. We don't need to scale. Okay, let's see how hard it is to do cloth. Come up to the t-shirt, click that button. Done. Not really, but sort of. So let's go ahead and run a simulation real quick and see what happens.
Oh, dear.
That's not helpful.
Well, yeah, you need to listen.
Okay. So we got a little problem going on here, right? It just falls to the ground. That's okay though, because we have a tool to fix that. So you come over here, please. Thank you. So let's look at some of our cloth behaviors that we have over here. So M cloth, I've got my object selected over in my properties inspector. Number one, I want it to be dynamic behavior. Now there is what is called like live cloth, where you can physically move it in the viewport. Man, makes my computer melt when I do that. So I try not to do that too often. I can apply certain forces. So here in a little bit, I'll add some wind to my flag. We keep going down. We got gravity, we got density. However dense your cloth is going to change the way it behaves. So again, I think these numbers are just kind of made up. Units are grams per square centimeter, so that's how much it weighs per square centimeter. Stretchiness, I leave that generally at 0. Bendiness, I will leave that at 0 unless it just needs to be more bendy. This man is very bendy. If you have a ball, if you made a sphere and you've applied cloth to it, you should play around with the enable balloon pressure. It will take a solid object and make it act like it's full of air. Again, these are things that you can just kind of explore and play on your own. I will show you in the videos how to add a tear. I'm not going to do that live. But I am going to show us how we attach our flag to our pole real quick. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to go into our sub selection mode for the M cloth. Just like every other object, there are sub objects to the M cloth modifier. In this case, we can affect the vertices. Notice how my tools down here change when I go to my vertex mode. I'm going to switch over to wireframe. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select the vertices that I want to hold on to the pole. Does that make sense? And I'm just going to select these first 4 rows. With them selected, I now say make these a group. And I'm going to call this a node, because that's what I'm going to do to it. So once I've made them into a group, now I get options. I would highly recommend that you do some Googling and go to the help file, because pinning is very important. I can pin vertices into space, into a particular location in space. In this particular case, I'm going to use node though. And the reason I'm going to use node is because wherever this pole goes, I want the flag to follow. And so by using node, these 4 rows of vertices are attached to that pole. So maybe towards the end we'll knock the pole over and we'll see how that works. Okay. So I'm just going to say node. It's going to say select something, and in this case I'm going to select my flagpole. So now wherever that pole goes, those 4 rows of vertices will follow. Let's go ahead and exit out of vertex mode, and let's run that simulation again. Let's stop it right about there. That's kind of a problem, isn't it? When it passes right through the pole. Don't really want it to do that. Let's get out of wireframes, go to default.
Yeah, Mac crash.
It's a bummer. Okay, did everybody see that? Where it passed right through? We don't want that. So how do we do that? How do we make it not pass through there? What did we learn to do today? Rigid bodies. Okay, so I'm going to select my pole, and in this case I'm going to go ahead and make it a dynamic rigid body, and that did a pretty good job of lining up my holes. Real quick, I want to look at, oh looky there, and the reason it did a good job is because I said generate shape by element. So I've got a round shape for the sphere at the top, I've got a cylinder shape, and I've got a square shape. So let's test that simulation again. Oh, that's much better. Now it hits the pole. Let's keep going. Let's add a force to our flag. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure my flag is selected. Don't really need to, but we're going to go to create forces. And in this case, I want to use wind. Now some of the forces, it doesn't matter where you put them or what direction they're facing. Some of them it does. With wind, you want to place the wind pretty close to where you want it to blow, and also the direction you want it to blow. So in this case, I'm going to go slightly downward and towards the flag there. If I select the flag, I go to my properties inspector, or I'm sorry, my command panel, wrong program. There's an add forces, and so I can just add the force. Let's go ahead and run that simulation again. So now my flag is going to blow very nicely in the wind. One last thing, I said I would knock my flagpole down. So in this case, I'm going to do that with a sphere. What kind of object should this sphere be? Of the three dynamic objects, or the three rigid bodies that we have? Kinematic. So in this case, we're going to say auto key. I don't want that to happen right away. I'm going to wait till about frame 100. So we're going to let our flag blow in the wind for 3 seconds. Set a key there. Go ahead and just bring that over to here. Okay. Let's go ahead and set this guy to be kinematic. Until, say, frame 125. And now let's run this simulation one more time. Get to see the flag blowing in the wind. Okay, looks like we need a little tweaking there, but for the most part, not bad. And we'll go ahead and bake this simulation then. So again, if I really wanted to keep this and I was going to use it somewhere else, the next step would be to create that dummy. We're going to take this object here and this object here, and they are both going to become children of that dummy. Try this one more time. There we go. Now I'm going to go ahead and bake it. So bake all. Except I made a mistake real quick. I'm going to go ahead and cancel. And if you're canceling, just hit it once. It's going to take it about 10 seconds to pop up, but it did register the hit. Now you may be asking, why did I quit? Because I don't want my flag to start out like that. So I'm going to go ahead and select the flag. I'm going to run the simulation. Actually, I need to unbake because I did bake the first 4 frames. So let's unbake all. There we go. So now I'm going to run that simulation and I'm going to pause it. I want the flag to start about right there. So with my flag selected, I go over to my modify panel, capture initial state. Remember that from over here? Capture transforms. Capture initial state's very similar, but we do it with cloth. So capture initial state. And that way, when I do bake this now, my flag starts off in a natural position rather than being perfectly straight.
When you hit unbake all, wouldn't that have also unbaked the
Nope.
tower?
Nope. What was the thing I did to these? I removed my MassFx. That's one of the reasons I removed my MassFx. Because this simulation is done. I'm not making any more changes. That's a good question. If I hadn't removed them, 100% it would have. But by working that step in there, I saved myself the heartache of erasing my animation. Okay. So now we're going to go bake all. And this can take a really long time sometimes. Sometimes it's very fast. Now while this is baking, I can't stress enough, you really should watch both of those short little videos that I have posted for you. They are going to answer many of your questions. They are going to reiterate a lot of what I said up here in front of the class. And they are going to make you better at this. So give me the 15 or 20 minutes that it takes to watch those two videos. For this week, like I said, build something interesting, build a tower, build a castle. First thing I ever knocked down was a castle wall. I did it off a tutorial. So I still have that video somewhere. I was very proud of it. While this is baking, I'll show you a couple of other examples. We're going to learn to do liquids next week. Yay! I'm excited. If you really want to see another one, there's yet another version of this lecture on my YouTube channel. This was MassFx.
Physics presets for it, like how you used to do it yourself?
I made all that by myself. It's a different angle of that one. This isn't just a goofy thing I made, but okay, a P-bomb is a force. It's a particle bomb. So, something fun you can do there. Gotta love the Minecraft. It's everywhere. Here's toppling towers. This is a good example of a happy accident that you can do. I'll show you when we get to the happy accident. I like to put my camera in interesting places. That's one of the nice things about doing VR and computer animation is I can put that camera anywhere I want. This is the happy accident. I fully expected this ball to go into there, but it didn't. So that just worked out really well. Sometimes when you run your simulation, it comes out different than when you baked your simulation. So just bear that in mind. I got a couple more for you. This is a physics simulation. The bottle was made by filling it with little round balls using the physics engine. So I dropped a couple of them in there. I would capture the transforms. I'd drop a few more in there. I'd capture the transforms and so on until I filled up that. I broke using a plug-in called Fractured Moroni. It allows you to break your objects in interesting ways. Dominoes, again, this is all just the physics engine. Okay. You start off small and you build something simple like a domino thing knocking itself over until you get used to how things work. And then you can build bigger and better. Very last one, which is this one here. In the things you've learned so far, such as particle. If you have a cannon that goes off, make smoke come out of that cannon. Fractured Moroni. Then I put it all back together, and then I applied the physics objects one at a time because they're very unique shapes. But you can do a lot of fun, cool stuff with this. There's Brian. You were just a kid. Yeah, I had huge hair. Let me see. I don't think I have any more necessarily on here. But the physics is one of the funner things to do in Max. Just pay attention to your sub-steps. Make sure that you have set your sub-steps correctly, and make sure that you are setting it to the correct shape. Save you a lot of headache. Okay, and we're about halfway done with our thing. Now, I could go ahead and cancel it, and it's going to save the frames that's already created, which is fine, because that's about as far as we need that to go anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of this. And like I said, just hit it once. It's going to take it a minute, but it will come up. So now if I were to scrub my playhead, of course, we can see the flag blowing in the wind. The ball comes. Oh, and it doesn't knock it over. That's funny. Wow. Wow, that one broke all to hell, didn't it? Guess that's what I get for canceling it. Okay, that's all right. That was the do as I say, not as I do portion of the lecture. All right. I hope you guys have fun with this. I always do every single time that I play with the physics engine. That's why I spent better part of 5.5, 6 hours doing this. I did not realize this made me laugh when I saw it. If you watch the smoke that comes out of my cannons, it looks more like confetti rather than smoke. I'll show you a better version of it. That was when because I applied a material to it, and the material was shiny, and so it's just reflecting the environment. And instead of looking like smoke, it ended up looking like confetti, which actually works pretty well, if you think about it. But they just look like little confetti again. Oh, I didn't show you guys how to do the lighting. I should probably show you that, because I want you to know how to do this. I want you to be able to do it. Now notice how I've got the background and everything in here. Okay, that is one of the side effects of doing your lighting this way, is it creates a skybox basically for you. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I guess it just kind of depends on how you like things done. But if you are using either the ART or the Arnold render engine, you can use, and you could probably do this with Scanline as well, but I have not confirmed that. but you can use an HDRI image as your lighting source, which is really great because it shows up in all your reflections as well. So if you have a nice silvery ball, it's going to reflect that image on that ball, which is going to add a heightened sense of realism or authenticity to your animations. So let's show you real quick how to do this. It's super easy. So let me give myself something to work with here. So we're going to have a plane here. Ooh, that has got way too many segments. Let's go ahead and cut that down. I am just going to create a very generic gray material for everything. Let's go ahead and select everybody. Apply. Okay, and we'll leave the reflections nice and high, because why not? Okay, so everybody should know this part. If you press 8 on the keyboard, that's going to bring up your environment and effects. If you don't know that or you can't remember that, you can go to rendering, and then it's environment and effects, and it will tell you again, it is the letter 8 on your keyboard. Normally, by default, you have a black background. If you just want to lighten up your scene, oftentimes just doing something like this is good enough. Giving it a blue tint to it kind of gives it an outdoor feel, plus it will raise the overall lighting in your scene. Even without a light source in this scene, that doesn't look absolutely horrible. It doesn't look great, but it really doesn't look all that horrible. Let's go to a cool spot here. There we go. Mid-fall. One of these days I'm going to 3D print one of these things in mid-fall. How cool would that look? It'd look pretty neat, wouldn't it? So let's go ahead and try this again since we're a little closer. So render. Okay. So it doesn't look great, but it doesn't look horrible, considering there's no lights in the scene. But now you can get these just about anywhere. I have found that this place seems to be the best, and they are free. HDRI Haven. There is another one, has a very similar sounding name. They want money. Okay, so while you're in school and you're poor, go ahead and get all the free crap you can. But they have all kinds of different sizes. They break them down to all outdoor skies, indoor lighting, studio lighting, nature, urban scenes, nighttime scenes, you name it. They've got sunrise, and that's when you get the best light, right? Sunrise, sunset, you get the most beautiful lights. So you can grab one of these, super easy. Click on this. Download the size you want. For most of my stuff, the 1K works pretty well. For some of you that can probably see a little better than I can, you might want to go a little higher. Okay. But any of those will work. And this is going to give you a little preview of what you're going to see in the reflections. Now, I already have a couple of these. So all I need to do is tick the Use Map button. Click where it says None currently. It's going to bring up the browser. Go to Bitmap. And then I keep mine in my Assets folder. This is nighttime, so we'll just go ahead and do the nighttime one. Why not? Okay. You could get in here and tweak some of these settings. I'm not really sure what most of them do, so I'm not going to tweak any of them. We'll hit OK. Let's go ahead and get ourselves a nice, oh, isn't that cute? And then we'll just go ahead and render this out. Okay. So even in this crappy little scene that I've created, you can see the reflections of the stars in the object. That type of stuff sells your animations and your images. Those little details that doing things the right way can provide. I want to go with a little bigger picture because that actually looks pretty good. And I want to be able to see it. Okay, so that super high resolution one, you'd get a much better reflection. So, super easy to do. Once you do that, then you can add additional lights if you want to, but if you have the right image, that's all you need to do, is throw in that light, or throw in that image and make it be your light for you. Save yourself some heartache. Lighting is one of the harder things that we do in Max. Getting it right, making it look good is pretty darn difficult. This is a great little tool. Work smart. I want you to work hard too, but I want you to work smart. All right. That pretty much sums up my portion of things today. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please do not hesitate to ask. I am, of course, here for you. I want you to make something cool. I want you to make something you're interested in. And, you know, if you need to, go back to childhood and think about what you built out of Legos. Go back to childhood, think about what you built out of the blocks. I've got a set of blocks in my office if anybody wants to play with them. They're yellow and red. They're the primary colors. They're blue, and they're great. I'm not saying that to be mean. I like to play with blocks. So, of course, I like to play with clay and putty and Play-Doh and all kinds of stuff like that. But that's it for today. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day. And don't forget to like and subscribe.